Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. So think about this for a second. We spend our entire lives, literally every single day, surrounded by this vast network of completely invisible signals. I mean, you've got Wi-Fi networks in your home, cellular data constantly bouncing between towers, and these massive, thick fiber optic cables buried deep beneath the oceans and the ground we walk on. We've really reached a point in modern history where we just completely take for granted that this invisible web will always be there, right? Silently connecting us, organizing our world, and just keeping the massive machinery of modern society humming along. But what if it wasn't? What if the digital world that we rely on for absolutely everything just simply vanished? Well, today, we are going to walk through a highly detailed scenario pulled directly from our source text to analyze exactly how a sudden nationwide internet blackout would cascade through American society. We're going to visualize the immediate domino effect, step by step, and really examine the raw vulnerabilities that are just built right into our daily routines. So get comfortable, because this is a pretty dramatic and, honestly, a very sobering unraveling of modern life exactly as we know it.
This right here is the absolute core question that anchors our entire analysis today. What would actually happen if the United States lost internet access overnight? I want you to really picture that scenario with me. You go to sleep, everything is completely normal. The next morning, your smartphone alarm wakes you up. Out of pure habit, you reach over, maybe you try to check the news, glance at the weather, or scroll through your messages. But there's nothing. No connection. The source material we're analyzing today paints an incredibly stark picture of this exact event. It details this fascinating, almost psychological phase of denial that would immediately kick in. First, you'd probably toggle your airplane mode on and off, then you'd probably go reset your home router. You might even step outside, assuming it's just a dead zone or maybe a temporary issue with your specific cellular carrier. Right? It would likely take hours for the average citizen to realize that they aren't isolated in this outage. The entire country is. And to be clear, we aren't talking about a slow degradation of services here, or some localized power outage where you can just hop in your car and drive to the next town to get a signal. No, we are talking about a sudden, catastrophic, and total loss of connectivity across the entire nation. The text makes it incredibly clear that if an event like this were to occur, the immediate consequences would be far more systemic than just, missing an email from your boss. So, how does a modern superpower actually function when its central nervous system is suddenly completely severed?
Okay, let's dive right into this. Section 1. The first domino. Critical infrastructure. Now, our source text explicitly identifies the immense weight of the major infrastructure pillars that would face severe immediate disruptions. It specifically calls out 4 critical areas: banking systems, healthcare, transportation, and telecommunications. Let's actually think about the logistics of how these systems collapse, because it's wild. Banking systems failing doesn't just mean you can't quickly check your balance on a mobile app. It means credit card terminals at the local grocery store go entirely dark. ATMs completely lose the ability to authenticate your PIN. That massive, invisible flow of capital that keeps our entire economy breathing, it just simply stops. Period. Then we look at healthcare. Modern hospitals are incredibly complex digital ecosystems nowadays. Without the internet, doctors lose access to electronic health records in an absolute instant. Pharmacies suddenly can't verify your life-saving prescriptions. The intricate second-by-second communication between different healthcare facilities completely breaks down. Transportation faces a similarly catastrophic halt. Consider modern logistics for a moment. The global supply chain relies on these just-in-time delivery systems that use automated, cloud-based inventory trackers. Without the internet, the software that tells a massive shipping container where to go or tells a truck what to load at the docks just goes completely silent. Furthermore, air traffic control data and automated train systems rely on constant, uninterrupted internet connectivity just to coordinate safe movements. And finally, telecommunications. Even if you happen to possess an old-school landline, the back-end routing for almost all modern phone traffic goes directly through the internet anyway. The foundation of our daily survival and modern convenience would be paralyzed almost instantaneously, basically trapping goods, services, and human communication in a state of suspended animation. Building directly off that infrastructure failure, we hit a genuinely terrifying reality. Our source highlights that emergency services and public safety networks would struggle to operate effectively. Think about the sheer gravity of that statement. When the grid goes down, the physical world does not stop. Car accidents still happen. Medical emergencies definitely don't pause. Fires still break out.
But the ability to actually coordinate a response to these crises is suddenly thrown decades into the past. Modern 911 dispatch centers rely heavily on voice over IP or VoIP and internet-based mapping protocols to triangulate exactly where a cell phone call is coming from. Without that digital footprint, dispatchers are operating entirely blind. The sophisticated data sharing systems used to track police cruisers and fire engines on digital city maps, they just vanish. The text explicitly notes that this systemic blindness would lead to dangerously delayed responses to crises. Every single second absolutely counts in an emergency, and this blackout scenario guarantees that critical, life-saving time is lost simply trying to figure out what is happening, where it is happening, and how to manually route help to the people who need it the most.
And the ripple effects just continue outward into the broader financial world. As our source points out, businesses that are reliant on online transactions and communications would experience immediate and significant losses. And let's be real, in today's world, that accounts for almost every single business. From the local neighborhood coffee shop that uses a tablet-based point-of-sale system, all the way up to massive multinational corporations managing insanely complex global supply chains. When transactions are frozen, new inventory cannot be ordered, and revenue drops entirely to zero. But let's dive a little deeper into what this actually means for the average person on the street. Consider payroll processing. Entire corporate payrolls are automated through digital banking pipelines. If those systems go down on a Friday, employees simply stop getting their direct deposits. Rent becomes due, bills start to accumulate, and citizens suddenly have absolutely no access to the funds they've already earned. The text states clearly that these massive disruptions would potentially destabilize the economy in the short term. The velocity of money just grinds to an absolute halt. You are looking at a scenario where the physical exchange of paper cash is literally the only possible way to conduct business. But because banking systems and ATMs are offline, most people won't even be able to get that cash out of their own accounts, which leads directly to the kind of societal panic that inevitably follows a sudden economic freeze. All right, moving on to Section 2, the human impact, society in the dark.
There is a deeply jarring contrast between the reality we know and the reality of this blackout scenario. In our normal daily lives, we are completely accustomed to instant communication, seamless access to online services, and educational institutions running smoothly integrated digital lessons. We operate every single day with the core assumption that the world's knowledge and our entire personal social network are just a screen tap away. But in a blackout reality, millions of individuals suddenly lose access to all of those essential information, service, and communication tools. You cannot text your family across the country to see if they are okay. You cannot pull up a news site to see what has happened or to check when things will be fixed. The source text explicitly notes this sudden, deafening information vacuum inevitably leads to widespread confusion and possible panic. Furthermore, educational institutions would immediately struggle to continue lessons. Schools and universities that rely heavily on digital student portals, online research, and smart classrooms would be fundamentally halted. Workplaces would be entirely paralyzed, especially those heavily dependent on digital tools. Think of the millions of people whose livelihoods exist entirely in the cloud. Software engineers, digital marketers, remote workers. Their jobs just simply cease to function. The psychological toll of this sudden shift, going from a state of constant global connection to total immediate isolation, is profound and deeply, deeply unsettling.
So, when we pull back and look at the immediate consequences comprehensively, we see a cascading collapse across three main, deeply interconnected pillars. First, within the economy, there is rapid, short-term destabilization and massive business losses, driven by frozen digital transactions. We see exactly how the failure of basic commerce immediately breeds stress. And that stress bleeds directly into society, capturing the real human element here. Millions of people lose access to vital information and services, resulting in confusion and panic, right alongside the complete paralysis of our educational and professional environments. When people cannot communicate with their loved ones or easily buy food, the social fabric strains incredibly rapidly, and that exact strain brings us to the security pillar, which introduces a completely new and, frankly, chilling dimension to this whole analysis. It highlights external threat vulnerability and widespread speculation. This dynamic shows us that an internet blackout isn't just an inconvenience, or even just a severe economic disaster. It is a fundamental threat to the stability and safety of the nation itself. When the economy freezes and society panics, a nation is at its absolute most exposed. Which brings us to Section 3, Looming Threats, a Vulnerable Nation. The source text makes a very direct and a very sobering assertion about national security. Modern defense relies heavily on internet-based systems. A complete internet outage could leave the country profoundly vulnerable to external threats. We often think of national defense in terms of massive physical assets, huge tanks, naval fleets, fighter aircraft. But those physical assets are coordinated, targeted, and maintained by incredibly vast and complex digital networks. Intelligence gathering, early warning radar systems, satellite communications, and cyber defense grids all depend heavily on internet infrastructure to function properly. When that infrastructure goes dark, the eyes and ears of the nation's defense apparatus are essentially blinded. Interagency intelligence databases that share crucial threat assessments suddenly become isolated islands, completely unable to communicate with each other. The text warns us that the country is left exposed precisely because so much of our modern protective shield is fundamentally digital. A physical military without its digital nervous system is slow, it's uncoordinated, and it's alarmingly blind.
And adding to that physical vulnerability is the immense psychological and strategic burden of the unknown. The text states that the blackout could also trigger rapid speculation about whether the shutdown was intentionally caused by a cyber attack. Imagine the sheer tension inside government and military war rooms during those first few hours. The internet goes down nationwide. Is it a massive, unprecedented physical failure of the power grid? Or is it a coordinated, deliberate attack by a foreign adversary or a non-state actor actively preparing the battlefield? Because communication is crippled, verifying the root cause becomes incredibly difficult. This speculation, as the source notes, adds massive fuel to the widespread uncertainty. Historically and strategically, a lack of clear attribution in a massive cyber event forces military leadership into a very tight corner. When they cannot confirm who or what caused the outage, they are strategically forced to assume the absolute worst-case scenario just to ensure preparedness. This kind of high-stakes uncertainty is incredibly dangerous. It can lead to rapid miscalculations, heightened defensive postures, and potentially a precarious global standoff, all while the nation is struggling just to communicate internally. Okay, let's wrap this up with Section 4, the aftermath. Protocols versus reality. The source text concludes with an incredibly sobering reality check. It acknowledges that, yes, of course, the United States has emergency protocols in place for responding to massive disaster scenarios. Governments absolutely have comprehensive recovery plans. But the text immediately follows that up with this observation. There would still be profound impacts on nearly all aspects of daily life until services are restored. What this perfectly illustrates is the fundamental limitation of literally any emergency preparation. You can have the most thoroughly vetted, deeply planned protocols in the world, but they simply cannot magically bypass the sheer scale of our absolute digital dependency. The disruption is inevitable, it runs incredibly deep, and it affects nearly every single aspect of how we survive day to day. We have built a world that quite literally requires a digital pulse to function, and until that pulse is restored, no protocol in existence can fully replicate the connectivity that keeps our society moving. Which leaves us with one final vital question. We've spent this entire explainer analyzing a national, systemic breakdown based on the source text. We've looked at the fragile economy, the blinding of our emergency services, and the profound vulnerabilities in national security. But ultimately, society is just a collection of individuals. If the grid went down today, right now, as you are listening to this, how prepared are you? Do you have physical copies of your essential documents? Do you have actual cash on hand? Do you have an analog way to contact the people you love? The material we reviewed today proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that our reliance on the digital world is absolute. Acknowledging that vulnerability is the very first step toward true resilience. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking the big questions.